Reimagining Healthcare in Ireland. My name is Derek Mitchell. I'm the CEO of IPOSI, the Irish platform for patient organisations, science and industry. And my job today is a relatively easy one. I'm just going to outline some housekeeping issues for the over 240 of you who have registered for this webinar, and which will hopefully make today's discussion just as fruitful as possible for all our participants. So today's objective is relatively simple. We hope that today's discussion will encourage health leaders in Ireland to put public and patient involvement into their strategic planning. We have assembled a patient-led panel of people with experience of getting involved, and we have invited the state agencies, the HSE, Department of Health, Sláintecare, and our colleagues to join us today. We're also joined by many of IPOSI's own academic and research and industry members who have an interest in this topic. So many of you will have received a statement from IPOSI, which is calling for health leaders to work with patients to co-create a public and patient involvement framework in Ireland for the health system. And we'll be following up today's webinar with another event in late September, with hopefully some of the outcomes of today's discussion. And we'll be reviewing some international public and patient involvement systems, which we believe will provide useful inputs to a future framework or policy. So today's format is an online discussion over Zoom, and today's session is being recorded and live streamed on the IPOSI YouTube channel. A recording of this discussion will be shared publicly about 2 days after today. And there's two elements to today's discussion. There's 40 minutes in the initial period for the panelists who we've assembled. And thank you to everybody who's joined us today. And then we've got a further half an hour afterwards for Q&A from the participants. So in relation to the Q&A, you'll see on your control panel that on the Q&A button, questions can be put to the panelists at any point by typing in that box. You should be able to see questions that are put in there from others, and you should be able to upvote questions which you think are important by clicking on the thumbs up icon. So the questions with the most thumbs up will rise to the top of the list. So please do give this a try, as it means that we'll be able to get the questions which are most important to you during the Q&A. So the Q&A is being moderated here in IPOSI, and we'll be feeding the questions to our moderator for today, which is Deirdre Madden from UCC. The other element that we're introducing is a poll, which will invite everybody to share just their own quick snapshot of their view of patient and public involvement in Ireland by responding to the poll questions. These will pop up on your screen right after the panel discussion, so right after the 40 minutes, and during the first few minutes of the Q&A. So we'll share the results of those polls throughout the Q&A session. Just a reminder that we are discussing on social media through Twitter on the IPOSI or at IPPOSI with the hashtags patients involved, that's patients plural involved, experts by experience, and nothing about us without us. So, and a reminder that we're also streaming live on YouTube. So without further ado, I'll just give a very brief introduction to today's panelists in alphabetical order. We're joined today by Geraldine Kelly, the Chief Executive of the Alpha-1 Foundation here in Ireland, which supports patients with the rare alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency and their families, and also promotes research. We're joined by Professor Orla Hardiman, a consultant neurologist from Beaumont Hospital and a clinical researcher in Trinity College and the HSE clinical lead for neurology. We're joined, hopefully, by Damien Nee, but I think he's having a little bit of trouble dialing in, who's an advocate with the National Public Health Emergency Team, NEPHET. He's a member of their expert advisory group. We're joined by Sarah O'Connor, the Chief Executive of the Asthma Society of Ireland. And Sarah is also an IPOSI board member and a member of the Sláintecare Implementation Advisory Council. We're also joined by Grace Rattigan, who's the patient advocate as part of the National Screening Service here. We're also joined by Gráinne Healy from Sláintecare, who will be in listening mode during the panel discussion, but I know that Gráinne is eager to give an intervention from the floor, as it were. So we'll have Gráinne come in after the panel discussion. And finally, the moderator today is Professor Deirdre Madden of University College Cork, and someone who will be familiar to many in the patient safety and in the ethics space in Ireland. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Deirdre, and I'll come back in right at the very end. So thanks.
Thanks, Derek. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us at this webinar today. I'd like to thank Derek and his colleagues at IPOSI for inviting me to moderate the session and for the technical help in getting all of this organized. I'm sure it'll be a really worthwhile hour or so of conversation and listening and learning. So as Derek mentioned, I suppose the reason that I'm involved in this whole area is really because of my interest in the field of patient safety and quality, which I was very privileged to become involved in as chair of the Commission on Patient Safety 13 years ago now. And the reason why I applied to be a member of the HSE board, and as part of my interest in patient safety and healthcare quality, I think there's immense value in listening to patients and those who use health services in building safer systems and processes. I really like actually the WHO Patients for Patient Safety statement, which talks about patients and their families as being a repository of critical information, which they can share when they're engaged and empowered. Patients and healthcare users' experiences are needed in efforts to achieve integrated and people-centered health systems and services, and therefore it's essential to ensure their voice is heard in healthcare. And we know that there have been changes in healthcare policy and patient charters as a result of voicing of such concerns and the huge work done by advocacy groups worldwide. So we have terms such as expert or knowledgeable patient, patient-centered care, partnerships with patients, patient-led services. These terms have become very common in Ireland and elsewhere. But despite this stated commitment to patient-centered care, it's often unclear, I think, what that means and to what extent it's actually honoured in reality. And I suppose that's part of the discussion we're going to have today. So I'm currently also the deputy chair of the board of the HSE. The board was established just about a year ago. It seems much longer given the last few months we've all experienced. But in establishing the new board, Minister Harris set out a number of priorities for us, including building trust and confidence in the health service. And for me, I think, and for the board, key to that is engaging with, listening to, and collaborating with patients and the public. I just wanted to mention perhaps one of the strategies that the board has endorsed in recent months, which is the patient safety strategy, which lists as its first commitment empowering and engaging patients to improve patient safety. And so in that strategy, the HSE commits to working with and learning from patients to design, deliver, evaluate, and improve care. The goal here is obviously to achieve a culture that fosters and welcomes authentic patient partnership in the process, not only of their care, but co-producing, delivering, and improving the health service. And there's a number of actions under this commitment, which might be relevant, I suppose, to the work that IPOSI and other advocacy groups are doing. So it's things like developing mechanisms to empower patients to contribute to the safety of health and social care services, developing resources and supports with patients that draw on their experiences and expert knowledge, strengthening partnerships with patient representative groups, and there are many others. And just, I suppose, to give you some reassurance about this document is not just an empty formula of words. These actions that are committed to in the patient safety strategy will be closely monitored by the Safety and Quality Committee of the board, which I also chair, to ensure its implementation and progress. And I'm determined that this document is meaningful and makes a difference, and that our committee and the board engages and listens to and acts on the voice and expertise of patients and safety advocates, and ensures that patient experience is an integral part of every paper, report, and action plan that we discuss at our meetings to ensure that patients are always at the centre of all we do. And just, I suppose, finally, on the board's behalf, patients are a hugely important asset to the HSE because they bring unique perspectives, particularly about how they experience care, and can help in uncovering ways to develop more reliable processes that lead to long-term sustainability of clinical and operational excellence. Patient involvement is crucially important, not only sharing experiences of system failures, but also in contributing to risk management, policy making, implementation, developing safety solutions, and increasing public awareness about healthcare risk in particular. And we know we must do much, much better on this front. So I'm really, really looking forward to hearing from all the experience that we're going to hear now from our panelists and from you, the audience, because I know you'll have challenging and fascinating questions to ask. So Derek has explained that some poll questions will be asked of you during the session. And he's also explained how you go about asking questions of panel members, which I'll try to capture as best I can. But for now, perhaps I'll just turn to the first question for our panel. And I'll ask our panel members to first begin by sharing one word describing patient and public involvement in Ireland today, and perhaps explain why you've chosen this particular word. So I'm not sure if Damien has joined us yet, but if not, perhaps I'll go to Geraldine Kelly first. Geraldine?
Hello, everybody. The word I've chosen today is vision. I still believe that there is a vision there for involving patients and public in healthcare, but I think it's still very much a vision. You know, I suppose the meaning of the word vision is that it's a mental image of what the future should be. And I believe that today that is what's there. It's a mental vision. It's not a true reality. I think expanding on the vision piece, that comes from planning using wisdom and experience. And I think that wisdom and experience will come from patients who are using the services that are there. I believe that we all have a duty and a right to participate in the development of our healthcare, because every single one of us on this call will, if we're not already today, be a patient. And I think we have the right to participate and to you know, to develop and basically grow the healthcare into the health service into what it should be. You know, I think the last few months have been a huge challenge for all of us. We have been put into absolute turmoil, both in our personal lives, our health lives. Everything has been put on hold, but we've also seen the country go into a state of total confusion. And I think with the right policies, with the right procedures in place, particularly within our health services, this sort of situation can be controlled a little better than it was today. And I hope that with, you know, the vision that's there today, what you mentioned, Deirdre, is really important. And I think if the commitment is there to do what is stated, we have a better chance of realising the vision that's there for PPI.
Thanks very much, Geraldine. Next, I'll ask Grace the same question.
Hi, yeah, my word is essential. And I think when I joined originally, I did fear that it was going to be a tick the box exercise, that patients were being brought on for optics. But I've learned that's not the case. And I think that I've also learned that it actually is an essential part of healthcare to have patients involved, have their opinion, mainly for a trust as well, the trust between patients and the service. If they see people in panels, making decisions, putting forth opinions, the trust is just much more pronounced. And so that's my word. It's essential that we have patients at every level.
Great. Thank you, Grace. Next, we will ask Sarah.
I suppose the word I had picked out was potential. And there was kind of a visual that I found going through my head over the course of the weekend that went alongside that, which was, you know, that little V symbol on its side that means greater than less than. I'm not sure what the actual name of the symbol is, but I found myself thinking about the trajectory that PPI, or patient public involvement, has taken for the last number of years. And I think it has gone from a less than symbol, being less than what it should be, and greater than. And I think people have conceptually within the healthcare service, within the broader, I suppose, civic society, and for patients themselves, I think we have all seen that V flip over sides. So it's gone from the less than to greater than. And I suppose to me, what seems really important is that we really build on that. Because the more that little V opens out and involves more and more patients and builds on that potential, the greater the role for patients, the greater the feedback loop, and the more we will all, as humans, benefit from that in Ireland. And I suppose, to me, I feel like there has been a certain momentum behind that for the last period of time, but I'd be very keen to see how we can use COVID, how we can use this this kind of flux point or this change point to really continue to make that be real and not purported and not pretend and not an add-on at the end. You know, the last slide for any service should not be a one-off patient quote. The agenda, the kind of work that you're just talking about there in terms of the agenda being driven, the change agenda, the safety agenda, that should actually be driven from the patient quote in the beginning. That should drive what we talk about every day, as opposed to it saying, and at the end, the patient said this nice thing. So I think there's a fundamental shift has been happening, and I think we can hang on to that shift and actually drive it forward. Or certainly that's my hope with potential.
Great. Thanks very much, Sarah. Orla?
So I'm involved in the delivery of care and in clinical research and also as an academic. And in each of those three domains, we're asked to make some statements around PPI, public patient involvement. And the phrase I used, which is probably sounds a bit cynical compared to the other, but unfortunately to me it's perfunctory, which means an action that is carried out without any real interest, feeling, or effort. And in the three domains in which I work, that seems to be the case. So there's a lot of lip service paid to person involvement or user involvement. I don't like the term patient because it makes us them and us. We work in a public health system. I'm paid by the taxpayer, so I have a duty of care. I'm a servant of the public, and the idea that I'm also part of the public, the idea that it's a divide between what I do for a living and what I use as a service user. To me, that's a false dichotomy, but it's reinforced within the system. So I think if we want to have a public health system that really works for people and the sorts of people that I look after, we have to do a lot better than we are doing at the moment. And we have to really take on board what Deirdre was saying. It's not just about safety and quality, though. It's about terms of engagement. The term, for me, as a clinical professional, I have to say that I have slight antibodies to the term safety and quality, because to me that means people coming over, looking over my shoulder with a clipboard, asking me to fill out forms and tick boxes and meet some metrics. I think it must be much more human and much more engaged at every single level. Every single engagement, there has to be a question that I have to ask myself as a clinical professional: did I do a good job? We all have to do. And then the people with whom I encounter have to be able to say to me, you did a really bad job there, you did a good job. So unless we really embed that in every single clinical encounter we have, not just about safety, it is about quality, but it's about a much more broadly encompassing psychological shift into the concept of public servitude in a way. You know, we're paid by the state to deliver public service. We are the public. We're delivering the service to ourselves, and this is what we should be doing. So I don't think we've incorporated that in any way into the service or the research that we do at the moment. I think it is unfortunately still very much I have to fill out that part of what I do, because otherwise somebody in the quality part of the hospital is going to be down my back because I didn't fill out that form. So I think we need to do better than that.
Thanks, Orla. I hope we have Damien now. I understand there's no video, but you might have audio. Damien, are you there? Hello, Damien? Hello? No, perhaps not. Okay, so thank you all very much for that. That's been a great start. So we might move on to the second question, which is, what did the COVID-19 experience reveal about public and patient involvement in Ireland, in your opinion? So some of this maybe we'll try to avoid repetition, but some of you did mention COVID in your responses earlier. But I suppose it's about the extent to which PPI, public patient involvement, was real and authentic during the last couple of months, and if so, in what way. So I'll start maybe with Grace this time, and then move on to Geraldine. Grace?
Yeah, I think during this, I think it exposed a lot of vulnerable people. Felt vulnerable at the start of this. It was something that nobody really had experienced before. Everybody had fear, their own personal fear for their own family and their situation, whatever that may be. And I think what we did learn, though, is that there's an awful lot put on the people that we see every day to give us their information. Like, everybody said every day to watch the news, to watch the briefings, to watch whatever was being told, and most people took every part of that in, and the advice, and really relied on it. I know for ourselves we did, and that trust is still there. But I feel that people, there's always this fear that we're not being told everything. What are we not being told? What are we only getting a snippet of the information? Are we only getting 80%? What's the other 20% that we're not being told? And I think at the start, it didn't feel like that for most people. It felt like everything was being laid on the table. This is the situation we're in. This is how bad it could get. This is what we need you to do. And I don't think we'd seen that before, where people felt that they were being really told what was happening. And I think going forward, we need to look at that people, if they're told the information, if they feel that they're getting all the facts, they will trust more. And this is something I've come up against a lot with my involvement, specifically obviously with the National Screening Service. This was an issue. Obviously with the resumption of the service, there was a lot of not knowing fully, and dates and waiting, and we were getting roadmaps for all these things reopening, and people were getting frustrated that we hadn't got dates for the National Screening Service. When we did, then the calm started to come again. So I just feel that if we're told as much as possible, and the public is told as much as possible in an understandable way, that there will be so much more trust and less drama, if that's the way to put it. And that's my piece on that.
Okay, thanks very much, Grace. I think that's a really interesting point, I suppose, about the way in which communication was so different during the last couple of months, in terms of the daily press briefings from NEFIT and briefings from the HSE and during the weekdays and so on. So I think that's really something to take forward in terms of restoring that kind of trust and lessening the fear because of being open and transparent with the information you're giving. So thanks for that. Geraldine, any questions?
Yeah, I suppose from my perspective, I would have been dealing with patients quite a bit over the last few months. And I suppose what struck me was that the communication between the patient, their families, and the medical teams taking care of those patients wasn't very clear. Often the patient's understanding of the condition that they had and what works and doesn't work wasn't taken into consideration. And for me, that's, really part of, what patient involvement means. Patients know what works for them when it comes to their care. And we had situations where patients ended up in hospital 3 different times during the last few months, purely because, first of all, there was no electronic health record. So a complete view of the patient's past history wasn't visible to the team, who were completely, overrun in the local hospital they may have been admitted to. Access to the consultant or specialist who had all of that information, because again, they're attending a specialist clinic in Dublin, wasn't available because the consultant was overrun in the hospital he was working in. And this completely slowed down the care of that patient. It put additional pressure on the local resources within the hospital, and it slowed down the care and the recovery of the patient involved. And I, you know, on a personal level, I had patients' families contacting me, pleading with me to try and get this coordination to happen so that the patient would get the right antibiotic, or, you know, would skip the normal protocol in the early stages to go directly to the treatment that they knew worked for their family member. So I think that, you know, this is a real indication of where people are now becoming much more clued in and when it comes to their health, what works for them and what doesn't work. And I think when we went into this panic during the early stages, or certainly the early stages of the pandemic, everything seemed to break down. Patients were told they weren't going into hospital. When they did have to go into hospital, there seemed to be a, you know, headless chicken situation going on where nobody seemed to know what to do to try and coordinate the care for those that were in there. So, you know, again, I feel that there's a lot of things at a very high level that need to happen, and, you know, having people's care plans and what works and doesn't work needs to be readily available to those that are looking after them. I think patients and their families need to be listened to and not disregarded when it comes to, you know, what has worked previously and how they feel about the treatment they're getting within the hospital setting they're in. And I think all of that will help to, you know, move us forward in terms of providing the sort of service that our patients want. They want to be listened to, and they want to help the healthcare professionals who are taking care of them to make a difference. And I really feel that, you know, they're the sort of things that we need to be looking at, you know, trust and partnership between the patient and the medical teams that are looking after them, and trust also between the medical teams and the specialists that are you know, that are delivering the service. Because I often think that within a local hospital situation, maybe there's a tendency not to want to make contact with the specialist in the area because they may be seen to maybe not understand a condition or how it works. So I think trust and partnership are hugely important in all of this.
Thanks very much, Geraldine. Sarah?
I had taken a note of a few things, Deirdre, and they're kind of diverse and sprinkled all over. I suppose one of the first things that occurred to me is that COVID revealed that there was a huge patient and public participation in healthcare. And it revealed that because patients stepped up to the mark in terms of how they managed their own health. They stepped up to the mark in terms of how their own personal responsibility fed into the functioning of the national health system. And we have probably all been doing that as members of the public in many different ways, but it all happened at the same time. So it was just very interesting to see all of us play a role, and for all of us to see that happening on a day-to-day basis. It's probably quite inspiring. I mean, and many things about that are very positive. Elements of it were worrying, I think. You know, we certainly felt on our own end, the services we run were inundated. I mean, we experienced a tenfold increase in queries and I suppose pleas for help on our advice line service as patients struggled to manage, you know, partly because they were trying to do the right thing and stay away from their hospital or stay away from their GP, but feeling unsupported. And maybe one of the second things which ties into that I thought COVID did was it made it a bit more okay for a patient to say, I'm very anxious about this. I'm very worried about myself, or I'm very worried about my family member, and I feel very vulnerable. And we heard a lot of discussion, obviously, about vulnerable patients and about underlying health conditions. And I felt like that's very challenging for people to articulate. They actually feel that in their day-to-day life prior to COVID all the time, and they kind of swallow it because there's a little bit of the Irish person that doesn't like to make a fuss. about their health and doesn't like to kick up a rumpus, whereas actually they're carrying a huge amount of that anxiety and worry around on a day-to-day basis. But COVID made it okay for particular patient cohorts, and obviously I'm thinking about respiratory patients, but also immunosuppressed patients and lots of other people as well who were in that vulnerable group, maybe older patients, to say, hold on a second now, I need some help to look after myself, and everything isn't okay, and actually everything hasn't been okay for a while, but this has made me particularly need help. I think that's probably a good thing in the long run, and we don't want to put that honesty back in the box. We want people to be able to say, I need help, actually, I need more information, I need more support, and everything hasn't been all right. I think that's very important for patients. I think it was quite positive for trust between professionals and patients themselves. I think, people have been very cynical and negative about some of the round people commending that work, but I think it has moved and reversed some of the negativity around healthcare professionals and the healthcare service that we've seen, and people realise that many healthcare professionals go to work every day with absolutely the right, amazing motivation, that they put themselves on the line, that they do their very best, and that they are heroes on a daily basis. And I think that's a really brilliant thing for us to hang on to and to try and be committed to. But I also thought that it showed a need for voices, a need for peers, us wanting to hear from the patient who had COVID or their family member, for us wanting to hear it in their real day-to-day voice, and for us to, I suppose, get under the bonnet of that experience. And I think those can all be real positives. But I feel myself, obviously, we work with patients with asthma and COPD, so they have a chronic condition. It's lifelong, and people often just really become quite challenged about how they talk about that, how they present the scale of the challenge to other people in their lives. And I just feel like we have to hang on to that moment of vulnerability and of honesty to allow patients to really dig into whatever change they need to make, whatever supports they need to make. I think that's a really important legacy that can come from COVID. So I know that's jumped around in a whole load of different ways. And I suppose the extra other piece is, I have certainly, from any healthcare professionals we have engaged with, listened to them talk with absolute relief and delight about the change that the healthcare system undertook. It wasn't perfect. Lots of bits of it went wrong, but they talked with real excitement and passion about how they saw the healthcare system really flex its muscles and be different. And I heard from patients whereby obviously many challenges in terms of how they got access to healthcare during that situation, but how they were very excited about the change of access and what that could potentially mean in the long run. And again, I think that's something we desperately want to hang on to, and we cannot let go, because I mean, there are horror stories and challenges and tragedies from COVID, but anything we can hang on to that is a good in the long term, I think, is the only piece that stands up on the other side of that weighing scale.
Great, thank you very much, Sarah. I think Damien is with us now because I can see you on the video. Damien, you're welcome. Thank you for joining us. So I might come to you now next, Damien, and just ask you, because you're in a unique position, having been the patient advocate on NPHET, the National Public Health Emergency Team, and you might have a different perspective on this question about what did the COVID experience reveal about public and patient involvement in Ireland, in your opinion? Okay, my apologies, everybody. I'm out in Connemara and my own computer is logged into another Zoom call and it won't let me disconnect. So so my apologies. Now, first, on the first issue that was mentioned earlier, improving has to be the main word. That I think there is real constant improvement now in how patient involvement is seen and perceived and welcomed in the medical service generally. And then on the communications thing, that if you think about it, what we all want are long independent lives, and water and sewerage is what gave us the big lump, and then probably antibiotics. And now we're at a point where there's another sort of an issue that the things that need fixing most in the world are probably long-term occupation, things like diabetes and asthma. My daughter has asthma, so I'm conscious of it. I have a bit of diabetes so far as like being a bit pregnant. And psychological issues that the medical professions in the 50s and 60s, I imagine,
was perceived a lot as sort of a once in a lifetime or twice in a lifetime interaction where you went and you got a bone fixed, or some structural thing that could be readily done and you were finished. Now it must be a different type of relationship where it's a real partnership between the patient, the medical profession, the bureaucracy that runs it, and society that funds and hits a balance, and it's very complex. And the role of the public and the patient representative in that has got immense potential to make people buy into minding their own health, because there's some things we can get fixed, but other things have to be ongoing. I mean, I would swim a good few mornings a week, but I can't any these days. And our exercise and nutrition have to be the main thing that we do. And what needs, there's a lot of complacency in ways in the public in Ireland when they think the medical profession will fix us, whereas we must all do it together. Medical education will probably evolve from this, because the burden that has been on a comparatively small amount of medics over the last while, and if you look at Florida at the moment and Texas, and we're welcoming in lots of Texans at the moment, which I worry about, that a point could come very quickly when our system is overburdened. So we really need to look at the investment in medical education and the use of patient volunteers or other kinds of interaction, instead of the crisp demarcation between the medical professional, the paramedic, the catering, all the backup staff in a hospital. And the way that we deal with just, how do we put it, that we're all going to get old, hopefully. And we haven't been necessarily good at creating a vision of how you can have long, independent lives. And that's what I would love to see come from this, that, you never waste a good crisis, that everybody comes to realize we can invest in our own health by exercise and good nutrition, by the medical profession in turn communicating better and more effectively. Say the screening program that is now getting going again. And how do we put it? Say, I still can't get over the take-up of bowel screening is only about 40%. If it was to go up to 80%, the amount of lives that would be saved. And whose role is it to make that happen? We want the medical profession busy doing the testing and following up on the colonoscopies and stuff. Whose job is it to get that participation in the testing program high enough? And just for clarity, I'm on the EAG, not NEFIT, because, again, you sort of half worry, or at least I shouldn't probably say it, but about the sense of urgency and things. We have a weekly meeting. We had meetings 3 times a week for a bit, but say the issues.
We might
stop. My apologies.
Yeah, no, we might just move on. I'm conscious that we've only a few minutes left for the third question, and I haven't yet come to Orla. So, Orla, your response to that question about what COVID has shown us about PPI.
Yeah, so I won't take too long. So I think there's kind of 3 main points that I wanted to bring. One was that for in the clinical leadership program in the HSE, I think it was really good. The experience in the area that I was, which is in neurology, was a really good coming together of the delivery of care by the neurology, by my colleagues in neurology and the voluntary organisation. So there were daily or weekly, daily at the beginning, and then weekly interactions between the Neurological Alliance of Ireland and colleagues, and then regular interactions with the various members of the Neurological Alliance. The HSE website, I thought the information site was really brilliant. It was really, really good. It was up, it was in time, it was regularly updated. We were asked regularly for updates. We had a lot of interaction, communication with the voluntary organisations to clarify questions, particularly those who are immunosuppressed. I thought that worked really well. And I thought that was a really good indication of the potential for the HSE to communicate really well. I thought that was a really good part of COVID. The second thing that was really good, I thought, was the recognition of the value of the voluntary organisations. And I'm really sorry that Geraldine had such a bad experience in the area that she was in, because we had a pretty good experience, I think, in our domain, which shows that you can do this, to the extent that we actually put together a crack team of professionals to look after people with vulnerable neurological disease. The HSE funded that, and it was a combined effort between the voluntary organisations that looked after these people, particularly who needed breathing machines, who had a neurological disability, and the hospitals. And it was a combination of 3 different hospitals, consultants and staff from 3 different hospitals, and the voluntary organisations going out doing home visits, and that was funded by the HSE, and that was also a true partnership between the voluntary organisations with a combined governance structure. So that worked really well. So I thought those things are really, really good. In terms of the things that didn't go so well, that I think identified problems where we have, it's just touching on a couple of points that other people made about how it did uncover how disjointed the system is, and how to some extent the HSE operates in a somewhat reactive manner. And one of the things that was of concern that I think COVID highlighted was this sort of intense attention, which is appropriate as well, I suppose, in funding hospitals and in delivering an adequate number of intensive care beds within the hospital sector. But there was a bit of a blind spot within the community sector, and we really paid for that, I think, in terms of what happened within the community sector. And it wasn't for want of people highlighting it, because because people were bringing this forward, the concern around what was happening to vulnerable people within nursing homes and within the community sector. And the third thing I think that does a little bit touch on some of the previous speakers was around autonomy, and the need to recognise and value autonomy in terms of decision making. And this became something of a live issue in terms of if we were to run into a situation where we didn't have enough ITU beds, and people were going difficult decisions were going to be made. And I became, along with colleagues, quite concerned about the process by which those decisions are going to be made. Now, the Department of Health delivered an ethics and framework around this, but it was very high level, and there was very little definitive operational guidance in how those decisions might be made. And there were stories, scare stories, that were coming out of people coming into the emergency room, and decisions being made within the emergency room about whether those people would be brought to the intensive care unit or not. And it was very unclear how those decisions were being made. So I think we need to learn from that, and we need to probably have a much more open discussion around exactly how we would make those decisions were this to happen again. And it opens up a discussion around who decides, whose job it is to decide, who's involved in that decision. Is a person or the family member a key important player in that decision-making process? And of course we're in a crisis situation, but to me that was a little bit unbalanced during COVID. The decision-making was very medical. I became very concerned because we look after a lot of vulnerable people where a COVID infection would be difficult, not necessarily catastrophic, but if the details of those particular conditions weren't understood, those patients would probably not be ventilated. And so that led to a set of questions that we raised around, so how do we make those decisions, and whose job is it, and how do we communicate those decisions? So I think we need to learn from that as well.
Thanks very much, Orla. Yeah, I'd agree. Those particular issues are hugely complex ethical issues as well, and we really need to see public and patient involvement in the decision making around those issues. So we'll move on quickly to the last question, and then we'll open up to questions and answers from the audience. I might just ask the panel members to be as brief as possible in your answers to this, because part of it will, I'm sure, come up in the Q&A as well. But I suppose the third question is really just looking at the extent to which COVID has spurred us to make some changes. Obviously, there have been some things that we've done well, some things that we haven't done so well. How do we learn from both of those to make changes to future-proof ourselves by promoting better healthcare in the future? And what can we do to support public and patient involvement in Ireland now? What steps could we take in that respect? So maybe some practical suggestions about how to sort of move this agenda forward, I suppose. So I'll go to Geraldine first, please.
Yeah, I suppose what, from my perspective, I think, and Orla mentioned it at the very start, was that PPI really needs to be embedded in the culture of our health service. So it needs to be something that our health service is living by, you know, patient involvement in their care. I think that's really important. And I think in order to ensure that is the case, first of all, there has to be really strong communication around what that involvement entails. I think the way the COVID-19 pandemic, the information that came out of the HSE was hugely beneficial. I think that was a driving force in making people understand the importance of what they had to do. So the public information notices that came out, the daily information that came out from the HSE was absolutely vital to making sure that we got through this pandemic. And I think that if we continue to communicate and trust people to understand the information that's been communicated, that will be a huge benefit.
Right.
I also think reporting is a really important problem. So I think it's very important to ensure that there is an element of reporting back on what involvement has taken place in clinical programs, what PPI involvement has taken place in clinical programs, and what the benefits of those have been, because I think it's through that reporting that people will begin to understand and appreciate the benefits of it and perhaps want to become engaged more.
Great, thanks. Damien? Sorry, you're on mute, Damien. Yeah.
You see, it's terribly difficult to know, but one thing for sure, our whole world has changed in terms of people's expectations, be they across employment or the fixes that we expect, or the likely funding of pension schemes in all sorts of complex ways in the future. And we must work together to ensure that how our healthcare, which is probably the most important thing in our lives, and this brings it home, is delivered, enjoyed, and funded as well. And that from earliest time in school, because education is what changes everything, we must start to see that it's a complete cooperative process between the patient, the parents, the families, the community, and far greater community involvement. Because as Orla said, you know, we're probably going to face similar dilemmas this winter again as to who gets the ICU beds. And that's about to happen in Florida in particular. I've pals there in a hospital in Florida, and they don't want to go to work at the moment because they know that in the next week or 10 days, they've got horrendous decisions to make. And we must do everything to avoid that happening here. And I don't see it happening. We have choices that we could make at the moment that would hugely ease the future burden Orla is going to have. And they're not being made. We're being indecisive. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Damien. Grace, your response?
Yeah, mine's both similar to Geraldine regarding the information that we're given. I think a big thing that I found, say for instance, again with the National Screening Service, was that when it came to us kind of relaunching the way the information gets to patients, we were involved in every step of that process, as in the website, everything. And I think that going forward really could be beneficial, as in, as Orla has said, that the HSE website was really good throughout this. The detail on it was really good. And I mean, as much as the human-to-human contact during this, as in watching the press conferences, has been really beneficial, you don't take everything in after it. but to know that then there was somewhere you could go to click and to see exactly what you needed to see, or what suited you. And I actually only seen this the other day when the National Screening Service was resumed. There was a link there to the HSE website with so much more detail of who was being called and when and what, and it was legible, it was understandable, and it was human to human. It was so easy to read, and I think people really, really appreciate getting their information like that and properly, and that they feel that they're being listened to, that somebody has gone in and said, yeah, we've checked it, we think that it's appropriate. And I think that would be a big thing for people now going forward, specifically when we don't really know where we're going at the minute either.
Great. Thanks very much. That message is loud and clear about the comms and the information being given to patients. Certainly receiving that. Orla.
Launch care. So the what the COVID showed us was that. Can you hear me? Sorry, I think I'm. Yeah. What COVID showed was that the best kind of care is the care that's closest to people's homes. So actually A&Es weren't full, and they weren't full because people were seeking their care elsewhere, and that's the way it should be. So I think we need to re-educate people. I think Damien's right. We need to be educating people about self-care and responsibility, because we're all citizens. The second thing I think that COVID has done and is going to continue to do is it's going to torpedo charge the need for an e-health system. Geraldine mentioned that. Electronic patient record, so that people can access the information, but also just in a shorter term, how much of the care can we deliver remotely, and how safe is that to do? So a lot of clinics now are experimenting with telemedicine and video conferencing, and the satisfaction that people experience describing that is actually very high. So I think when we going forward, the system is going to change in three ways. I think we really, I think it's helping to deliver the aspirations of launch care, because we have to deliver the care as close to people's homes as possible. We can't have big long waiting lists, big long waiting times in clinics. We have to have better data management and data dissemination, and we have to look at new and more efficient ways of engaging with people, and that is probably going to be through improving our telemedicine, telelink, video linked services. And this is happening the world over. It's not just in Ireland, actually. But I think they're the three ways that things are going to change.
Great, thank you. And finally, Sarah, on this question.
One of the things that I'll flag is the piece I mentioned at the Launch Care Implementation Advisory Council, and it may seem a stretch to move it from patient and public involvement into the piece that I think is important, but to me I think it's pretty key, and that is the electronic patient health record, because a huge amount of what some of the other patient advocates have referenced there is the need for a patient to have a voice. And there are times when a patient is unwell and they cannot speak about how unwell they currently are or they have been, and they cannot literally verbalize their current symptoms or their past symptoms and what has been happening. And for me, the electronic patient really gives that person a voice when they need it most. And to me, I suppose we've looked at patients with asthma and COPD whose health has been materially impacted by the fact that the person who is giving them the healthcare intervention in that moment does not know enough about how they have been doing for the last while in order to make the best decision. So to me, that is part of making sure that the patient's voice, when it is most needed to be heard, is properly heard. And that is not about the patient being able to open up, that is about the system being built on information, being built on that need. And to me, I would live and die by that. It's the one piece that I feel if we got that over the line, I would feel like, hallelujah, we have really driven very fundamental change. We have been at events where we've listened to people in the UK, people in Northern Ireland talk about what that electronic patient record means for patients with asthma or COPD, other health chronic conditions. And it is revolutionary and it saves lives. So that's one piece. And I suppose the second piece is about the muscle. So the listening muscle has been built, but we have to systematize that and formalize that. So for example, one of the things I found myself thinking about this weekend in advance of today was the GP contract. I mean, that was a huge piece of change about how our healthcare system works in Ireland. And I am at a loss as to how any patient was actually involved in that policy decision. It's really not clear to me at all. There have been times when I have spoken to people we do in the HSE and talked about what a patient wants from that. I know obviously that the unions are very involved in what the GPs want and need from that. And I feel like there's probably a lot of involved from a policy level as to what's needed on the top end. But I feel like every opportunity from here on in has to be about systematizing and formalizing the patient voice being built in. It's not a once-off. It's not a snapshot of a listening. It has to be engagement, involvement, respect, trust, and it has to be consistent at every level, I think.
Thanks, Sarah. So that brings us to the end of that particular phase of the webinar. So I'm going to ask Gráinne Healy now to speak for a few moments. I think you're going to give a response to some of what you've heard already, Gráinne, and maybe speak very briefly about Sláinte Care.
Sorry, yes, I think I'm in now. Thank you very much. Look, that was absolutely amazing to hear so many people speak. And I suppose my role in Sláinte Care, I work as a consultant to the Sláinte Care implementation team. And my role over the last year and a half or so has been looking at ways to improve citizen and staff engagement in the Sláinte Care project, as it were. There is no doubt that the COVID-19 experience has in many ways forged pathways that even a year ago there were people saying that'll never happen, that'll take years, and within weeks we saw some care pathways not only being forged but being delivered and being successfully delivered. So I think there are experts here, far more expert than I am in terms of the needs of the current population, but we know that the population of Ireland is changing rapidly over the next 10 years, and the health service has to change. And many people have been expressing here this morning the issues, the priority issues, and how citizen and staff engagement might help to deliver the Sláinte Care project. I mean, with Sláinte Care, the public and patients and users, we will see a shift. The shift is from the majority of care going from acute to a community setting, so that we deliver care closer to home, as Orla has mentioned, when it's most needed and in the most appropriate manner. We want to support our aging population, and I'm 61, I'm looking at this in a personal way, those with chronic conditions, to manage our health better so that we avoid ending up in situations where we're maybe in emergency departments inappropriately. And then I think the point that Sarah and Geraldine were making, and Damien, about enabling citizens to manage their health better. This idea of helping us to live healthier lives and preventing illness, this cooperative process that's being discussed. So I think this will be done through delivering right care, right place, right time, and improving the patient experience is a fundamental Sláinte Care goal. And I believe it should underpin all of the actions. I welcome the suggestions about this should be both a bottom-up and a top-down approach, that patient voice, patient experience needs to be visible in so many places and so many spaces. In terms of Sláinte Care itself, I suppose, the Sláinte Care Advisory Committee has four people on that committee who represent the patient voice. You've heard from Sarah earlier on, and that's really important, that at that implementation level, the voice about what should the priority be, what should be happening quickly, and the critical voice of what's not happening, and that's really important. The other thing that I think we've seen, particularly in COVID-19, is some of the some of the learnings and some of the changes that have taken place, that certainly Sláintecare feels if we can hold on to those learnings, we will be moving forward much faster and accelerating the implementation of Sláintecare. So at the moment, one of the things I'm involved in there, we have a series of 4 webinars that we're running with HSE and with IFIC, the integrated care people, looking at what have been the key things that health providers, whether that's in a community setting or indeed in a partnership setting, what have been the learnings and what have been the successes. So ranging from, you know, the Wicklow frailty care, ambulatory services, really interesting stuff that has happened either through Sláintecare support directly or simply projects and work that has been, I suppose, planned, and during COVID-19 it became imperative that things were happening in that local partnership way. So those seminars are, we're presenting the second one in this format that you are also, and it's really for HSE frontline people looking at the work that their colleagues are doing in hospitals, in community, in local health centres, and focusing on the learning and also focusing on what are the challenges. So there was a lot of money put in a lot of places during COVID-19. How can we ensure that the ones that are working, that have shown that they are meeting service users' patient needs while protecting frontline staff, what are the ones that we need to be holding on to? The individual patient identifier is hugely important in this. It comes up in practically every citizen staff engagement setting that I've been in. I know that there has been a lot of progress made on this. There's no doubt that being able to share electronic records cross from GPs to other places. Speaking the other day to a group of GPs, and they were saying to me that in their view, no patient is ever going to go back to sitting in one of their clinics to get a certificate to bring, you know, a cert to take into work. Those days are gone, and that really has been brought to an end through the use of electronic ways of writing certs and sharing prescriptions. So I think we're seeing some really good things happening. I think over the last year for Sláintecare, you know, we've seen a number of agreements. I want to mention the 6 new regional health areas, which were only announced, and then we were coming.
Grania, briefly, if
Okay.
you don't, we're running short of time. Thanks.
Will. I think, though, one of the things that we managed to do when those regional health areas were announced, we did hold a number of regional engagement sessions pre-COVID, which included service user involvement. So that is the model that Sláintecare is looking at for those new 6 regional health areas, so that we can ensure that whether it's through the community health organisations, the hospital groups, and the community voluntary sector groups in the regions themselves, that from the beginning of this new process, that we have the voices that people are talking about today. So in summary, Sláintecare is about these, it is about the voices, and we're going to have to find new ways now of including those voices, now that the old ways of bringing 100 people into a room just aren't. So we're really delighted to be here today. I'm looking forward already to the September webinar, where we're going to look at some of the international best practice experience that Derek was mentioning. And Sláintecare really wants to be involved in this project and wants you involved with Sláintecare.
Thanks very much, Grania. That's been really helpful. So a couple of questions have come in. The first one actually is one that relates specifically to Sláintecare, and I'm going to ask Sarah this question. So Sláintecare, the question is, Sláintecare engages citizens in the public in its reform agenda, but once the reform is done, it does not foresee the creation of a system of public and patient involvement across the health system per se. So what do you think can be done in that context? So it's part of the reform in terms of having people on the steering group, the advisory groups and so on, but how do we create PPI as part of the actual health system itself once reform has been delivered?
Well, I think first of all, Deirdre, very straightforwardly deciding we should be. Patient engagement is absolutely invaluable. The insight can really drive change. It can allow people who work in these services day in, day out to take a step back and to look at the service really critically in a really good way, and to say, actually, this isn't enough, we need more, we must do this differently, we got it wrong. And the idea that you would, at the inception of something big like the transformation of healthcare, which is what we're trying to do in Ireland, that you would look at that and you would say, well, we'll bring the patient in the beginning, but we'll leave it out then. To me, that seems crazy. I don't see from anyone I deal with in Sláinte Care or anyone I speak to that there's an interest in approaching it that way. I don't have a roadmap right now, and it doesn't look to me like Sláinte Care has one right now for what this looks like in 10 years' time, for what patient public involvement looks like in 10 years' time. But I wouldn't imagine that anybody has any interest in running it that way without there being a very good roadmap and a very clear one, and without it being that embeddedness piece that we've all kind of talked about this morning or this afternoon. So to me, I suppose that seems like an absolute no-brainer, and I wouldn't be interested, as somebody who gives up their free time to attend these meetings, to engage, to think, to listen, and to bring that back to the room. I wouldn't be interested in standing over that as an outcome. I think that would be rubbish.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Next question is for Orla. So the comment is, we need a change, we need PPI. What support systems will help this happen?
I think, just going back to the point I made earlier, it's a public health system for the public, and we are the public. So I echo what Sarah is saying. I mean, it's about all the things we just talked about. It's about trust. It's about communication. It's about having a system whereby it's okay and it's safe for somebody who's receiving the care, who's the care, the user of the system, to feedback, to say that didn't really work for me, or that process didn't really work for me, and for the people who are delivering the care to have the humility to recognize that there's room for change, and that requires a shift in both directions. But I'm really uncomfortable with this idea of them and us. I really am, because I think I think everybody who works in the health system, this came out during the COVID as well, is there because they really want to make a difference. There are very few people working in the health system who feel that they're there because they're God's gift to humanity. I mean, that those days are kind of gone. But it is quite difficult to implement change within the structures. It's quite a rigid system. Even good ideas that people have within the system are very difficult to implement. I think Sláinte Care hopefully will be a more flexible system from that point of view. So to answer the question, I think it's a different way of practicing, but it's also a mechanism within the structures of the system that we deliver that's lean and agile and flexible, and is open to delivering change where the change is rational and reasonable, and where there aren't 24 different bureaucratic hurdles that are put in place to implement change, or where a good idea is just too difficult to do because it's because my CEO doesn't think it's a good idea, because he just thinks that what I do is rubbish. So we need to get over those sort of interpersonal bureaucratic barriers to allow good ideas to flow. And Sláinte Care had done that in the call that went out last year, but we need to do an awful lot more of that. And but trying to implement this in the current structure and system is enough to put even very, very enthusiastic people like me knock us back, because it's really hard to implement change within the system. It's really hard if you see a need or a need to deliver something because it's not working for the people that you're serving. It's very difficult to implement change, even when there's the best will in the world. So I think we need structural change within the system to make it lean and agile, and to build cooperatively and collaboratively. And I'm hoping Sláinte Care will do that.
Thanks very much, Orla.
No pressure, Grania.
So I'm being told that we're due to finish around now, but we have time for another probably 2 questions or so, if the panel members can stay on for another 10 minutes. So the next question to Grace. So the question is, or the comment is, we will be living with COVID for some time. We need obviously to be able to resume non-COVID care, especially for people with chronic and or rare conditions. So how do you think this can be done while involving the voice of the patient?
Yeah, I suppose that has come up an awful lot as well during this, that people felt that, you know, the risk, like a lot of things were put on hold because of the risk, but now we've kind of had to manage that risk now going forward. And I think people probably didn't feel like they were asked that, as in all these decisions were made to halt so many services, which at the time was probably the right decision. But when it was coming on back on board, then people kind of felt lost, I think, in a position of, well, I actually haven't been asked how I feel about, do I want to come back to that service, or am I comfortable? And I think the decisions were just being made for people, and everyone felt a little bit lost in that. You know, you had people kind of, I'm going to use the screening service again, but for instance, for cervical smears, we're saying, well, you know, why can't I go in and have that done? It's not very close contact, while the reasons that that wasn't being done weren't exactly, you know, it wasn't so much a logistical of the service itself, it was afterwards and the labs and stuff like that, or the people to read the smears and going forward. But I think that was lost again. So I think if we're going to start reopening services, and we need to speak to people who use those services, how they feel, how they will feel comfortable re-engaging with services as well. That, you know, what measures in these centres will make them feel comfortable. And I think that needs to be looked at, definitely, and it needs to be looked at quite soon, I think, as well.
Okay, thanks, Grace. I might ask you, Geraldine, the same question, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you, Grace. I think there's a lot of fear and uncertainty now with patients in terms of how their care will be handled going forward. And I'll give you a personal example. My mother had an appointment which was being cancelled purely because it wasn't probably safe or appropriate for her to attend an outpatient clinic. And she received a text message which basically said, you are now going to receive a phone call. But she doesn't have a smartphone. And the text message had a link to a document which explained how the process was going to take place. And also then didn't give her a date on when it was going to happen. She subsequently received a telephone call at 8:15 in the morning, which my mum was 87, wasn't out of bed. My dad took the phone call and proceeded to have the consultation with the medical team without my mum's presence. So I think this created a little bit of fear for me in terms of, I think, you know, how this is all going to work going forward, because I think the virtual sessions are a fantastic idea and they work for a very high percentage of our population. But a lot of thought needs to go into how we deal with vulnerable groups and how we deal with the elderly. This was particularly a geriatric clinic. So, you know, a big percentage of those people maybe were not going to have access to the information they needed. So I think, again, without involving patients in what exactly this, you know, the new look health services is going to function like, they're going to become very, very scared, very skeptical, and probably unwilling to take part. So something that has huge potential and will really work if it's done properly could fail for some people if it's not thought through. So it's just an example of where I think, you know, things have changed. Things will change for the better, but they could very easily, you know, go wrong for a number, and particularly for people where this could be of great benefit. I suppose that's really kind of, you know, that is a personal example, but I think it's worth putting out there because we can see that there's huge potential for change. Things have happened that have made a great difference in the last few months and will make a difference going forward, providing we do it right.
Okay, thanks very much. So we might just finish with the next question, and I will ask Damien and then Orla, if that's okay. So the person has commented, as a patient who believes in PPI from start to finish, one of the elephants in the room around PPI is the resource cost versus the added value. So what is your opinion on this, and how can we address the naysayers? So Damien and then Orla, please.
Well, first of all, instead of costing, I would like to imagine that things like the EHR, proper comprehensive medical records, can save an awful lot of money. That we shouldn't always have to think in terms of what's this going to cost, because if we got good public medicine programs going and good cooperative stuff, we can save on many of the chronic treatments and stuff. Diabetes costs 1.9 billion a year to treat. Probably 60–70% of it is preventable. If I made a fraction of the effort before I got it that I make after it, I wouldn't need it. And I gather it costs about 9,000 per annum per skull to treat diabetes. Now, if you then take things like the electronic health records, and all this is connected, you ought to be able to have your little card, and whether you go to a chemist, as you can do in Singapore, for example, or a GP or a hospital or anywhere, all of your sequential medical activity comes up, your prescriptions, your everything. And you then need that carrot and stick that I think everybody should have an annual health checkup. And if, like me, the last month I couldn't swim, fat as a thing, say, right, here's an appointment with a nutritionalist. If you attain these modest goals of losing a kilo or not getting any fatter, whereas if you choose not to, maybe you've got to pay 10–15 quid when you go to your GP. And if you don't consume any medical services over a 20-year period, you get a few extra days holidays, or you get a little bonus from your employer or something for being good and healthy. And there can be a whole lot of interesting, innovative ways that the Internet of Things can change all our lives, but only if we plan and get a strategy that works. I mean, part of the use of wheelchairs in hospitals is for moving medical records around. Mine, because I'm from Connemara, I got first little interaction and broken something in regional in Galway. Then I had a job done in Limerick, and I have a very good bit of plumbing bypass done in St. James's. That they're scattered all over the place, and the logistics of that, as I was saying, especially in a time of COVID and that. Whereas if it was all on computer, centralized, done by the HSE, many of the people repurposed to run, manage, and train this, it could save gargantuan amounts of time and save an awful lot of money.
Okay.
So, resources can be found, and we have huge duplications that are unnecessary. And nobody would be out of a job or a position. We could save so much, people could get a wage increase and that. And okay, thanks.
Thank you. Orla.
Okay, so I think that one of the greatest banes of the Irish health system, I've been in it for almost 30 years, is this preoccupation with it's too expensive, so we shouldn't do it. So 2001, in Ballymascannon, there was a really good public health program with good GP contract. GPs would have signed up to it. Micheál Martin was the Minister for Health at the time, and it was knocked back by Charlie McCree because it was too expensive. And if we had implemented that system at that time, we wouldn't be doing Sláinte Care now, because we'd have Sláinte Care. So my point is that if it's worth doing, it's worth cost, it's worth paying for. And we need to consider that if we want to change a health system, it's not going to be free. You have to run the health system the way it is while you're implementing change. And it's not a question of a cost benefit, it's a question of the absolute necessity. So I think, with respect, it's the wrong question. I think it's, is it worth doing? Is it the sort of system that we want? Is it the sort of system that we value? And as citizens, is this how we value our health and ourselves? And if the answer is yes to all of those, that's what we need to do. So I don't think it's a cost benefit. I think it's a need. And once we're willing to recognize the need, and that this is a road that we're going to go down, and to my mind, Sláinte Care is the best road that we have. There are some naysayers, some people there are some quibbles that you might have, but on balance, it's the way we should go. We also should have an NIHO, by the way, a National Institute of Health Research, to build in quality assurance and quality improvement. But we have to pay for it, and it's not a question of we can't afford it. We can't afford not to do it.
Well, I hope that message will get through to our new Minister for Health and Pascal O'Donoghue in due course. So I think we'll draw the question and answer session to a close now. Certainly there's been some really strong messaging that I've heard, and it's been really interesting and useful around culture and importance of communication and the kind of continuation, I suppose, of the way in which information was being shared with the public during the COVID crisis, I think. so openly and honestly, which helps with trust and dispelling fear. I think that was really important. We've heard messages, a lot of messages, particularly from Orla, I suppose, in relation to Sláintecare, self-care and responsibility, e-health and electronic health records, all of which are hugely important. And so I will finish at that point and thank you all very much. I'm going to pass over to Derek now, but before I do, I just want to thank you all for listening and for participating and for engaging with your questions. And particularly like to thank all of our panel members, Damien, Geraldine, Grace, Sarah and Orla, and of course Gráinne Healy from Sláintecare. So it's been a really useful session, and like others, I look forward to the next session in September. So over to you, Derek.
Thank you, Deirdre, and I'd like to echo those thanks as well for everybody who's not only been on the panel and chaired and interacted, but for all of the, I think it's 170 people who dialed in, of whom the vast majority are still on the line. So even though we're a little bit over time, I'd like to thank everybody for staying with us. I thought that was a fantastic discussion. I think that we've captured all of the questions that have been put through the Q&A, of which there's 46. And I know that I haven't been checking my Twitter feed, but my phone has been beeping left, right, and center. So there's good conversations going. Just to remind everybody that the recording and the summary discussion will be shared within the next 48 hours. And a reminder that this discussion will continue. So we're on September 29th. So that's a date for your diary. We will be following this up with a number of international examples, and great to hear that Sláintecare is interested in coming in, and I know we've been engaging on that quite a bit. In terms of taking forward today, I think it would be important that we invite both representatives of the department and the HSE to be in touch, because it would be really important to have their insights and their vision at this point, so that they've had time to reflect on the patient perspective. And one of the things that I'd just like to remind people of is an exercise that IPOSI is currently conducting around patient and public involvement. It's a mapping exercise. All information is on our website, on our homepage, and it's really about mapping what current opportunities are available to patients and the public in the Irish health system. So we look forward to even informing people of the results of that exercise at the September. So please feel free to share with your people in your networks who are active in the PPI space. Lastly, I'd like to thank all of my colleagues in IPOSI for putting this show together. That's Laura Kavanagh, Mel Connors, and Debbie Hutchinson. It's been really interesting as a format, and I'm so glad that we did this at this point in time. And again, particular thanks to everybody for joining us today. So with that, we'll see you all again soon.
Thanks, everybody.